What if the storm outside has passed, but the one inside you still rages on quietly, endlessly? In this story set in Denmark, you'll discover how peace sometimes hides in the most ordinary morning and how to hear it again. The silent morning. Have you ever woken up and felt like the world forgot to press play? That's what it was like this morning in Copenhagen. The rain had finally stopped after 2 long days of wind and thunder. The city was soaked, but quiet, too quiet, like someone had turned down the volume of life itself. From the small window of my apartment, I watched the clouds drifting away. Drops of rain still slid down the glass, moving slowly, like they didn't want to let go. Somewhere below, a bicycle bell rang, soft, distant, lonely. It reminded me of how peaceful things used to feel before everything got heavy. That I made my bed, but my thoughts were scattered. You know that feeling when your body wakes up, but your heart doesn't? When everything looks normal, yet something invisible still hurts. That's what grief feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet emptiness that hums in the background. Copenhagen after a storm is a strange place. The air is clean, the streets shine, and yet, there's a weight that lingers. Maybe it's not from the rain. Maybe it's from the people, from hearts that have learned to smile even when tired. In Denmark, silence is part of the language. People don't rush to fill it. They sit with it, sip their coffee, and let it breathe. That I stood there by the window, hearing the faint echo of church bells in the distance. My reflection in the glass looked like someone who'd lost a battle no one else saw. But that's how healing often begins, not with fireworks or fresh starts, but with stillness. And maybe, I thought, peace doesn't return all at once. Maybe it comes back in small sounds, the dripping rain, the creak of wood floors, the sigh of your own breath. Tiny reminders that you're still here, and life hasn't given up on you yet. Outside, a seagull cried. Inside, I whispered, let's start again. The coffee ritual. There's something oddly comforting about the sound of boiling water. It's like a small heartbeat in a quiet room, steady, patient, alive. Every morning, I make my coffee the same way, slowly, intentionally, as if it's a sacred ceremony. Maybe that's what we do when life feels uncertain. We hold on to rituals, hoping they'll hold us together. That I opened the window just a little. The air was cold, crisp, and carried that faint smell of wet pavement and salt from the sea. Copenhagen after rain always smells like renewal. But inside, it was different. My thoughts were still cloudy, like the storm hadn't left my chest. As I poured the coffee, steam rose like a small ghost between my hands. I watched it fade away, and for a moment, I thought of the days before everything changed. Back then, mornings felt lighter. I would hum to myself, open my laptop, and write without thinking too much. I didn't know how precious that kind of peace was, until it disappeared. It's strange how pain can turn you into a slow version of yourself. You move slower. Think slower. Even breathe slower. And yet, in that slowness, there's something sacred, something the Danish call hygge. It's not about being happy. It's about being okay in the small things, the warmth of a cup, the flicker of a candle, the hum of the radiator. I sat down with my coffee, staring at the wooden table worn from years of use. Every scratch told a story, dinners shared, books read, silent mornings like this one. I took my first sip. Bitter. Strong. Real, and for the first time in a while, I realized, maybe healing isn't about forgetting the storm. Maybe it's about learning to taste the coffee again, even with the aftertaste of rain. The stranger at the bench. The sun finally peeked out that afternoon, shy, pale, uncertain. I decided to go for a walk through Fredericksburg Gardens, one of those places where time seems to move slower than anywhere else. Ducks floated lazily across the lake, children laughed in Danish that sounded like soft music, and the world felt, almost kind again, that there's a certain peace in walking alone, isn't there? Just you, your thoughts, and the sound of your shoes brushing against wet gravel. I found an old wooden bench near the water, half dry, half soaked, and sat down. That's when I saw him. An elderly man in a dark coat, sitting a few meters away, feeding crumbs to pigeons. His movements were slow, deliberate. Each piece of bread was placed gently, as if it mattered deeply where it landed. He looked at me and smiled, not a polite smile, but the kind that says, "I see you." For some reason, I smiled back. Maybe it was the way he carried his silence, like it wasn't heavy at all. After a few moments, he spoke, his voice soft, with that distinct Danish rhythm. "Beautiful day after the storm, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yes, it feels clean." He chuckled quietly. "Clean, but empty. That's how it always feels after the wind takes something away." I didn't know what he meant, but I could tell, he wasn't talking about the weather. There was a sadness in his eyes, the kind you don't try to hide anymore. We sat there for a while, two strangers sharing silence. Sometimes words ruin moments like that. The air between us was filled with the sound of pigeons, the gentle ripple of the lake, and the faint echo of lives we both had lived before the storms. I remember thinking, maybe the people who've known loss recognize each other without speaking. Maybe pain has its own quiet language, and that day, it spoke Danish. The conversation about loss. He spoke first, not about pain, but about weather. "You know," he said, tossing another crumb to a pigeon, "storms in Denmark don't last long. But the gray skies, they tend to stay." His voice had the softness of someone who'd made peace with loneliness. I smiled faintly. Maybe that's true for people too. He turned to look at me, his eyes pale like winter light. "Yes," he said, "we survived the storm, but we keep a bit of it inside. It becomes part of us." There was a long pause. Only the wind spoke. It carried the smell of wet earth and distant coffee from a nearby cafe. I didn't know why, but I felt safe talking to him, this stranger who seemed to know what silence meant. He told me about his wife, gone 3 years now. "She used to wake me up before the rain came," he said with a chuckle. "Said she could smell it in the air." His hands trembled slightly, but his tone stayed calm, like he had repeated this story enough times to make it less painful. After she passed, I kept expecting her to warn me again. But the storms just came. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Maybe that's what we all need sometimes. Someone to listen without fixing. Then he said something I'll never forget. In Denmark, we don't fight sadness. We walk with it. Like walking beside the wind, you don't stop it. You just keep moving until it softens. It struck me deeply. Because isn't that what language learning, or healing, really is? You repeat. You fail. You start again. You walk beside your mistakes until they stop hurting. That we sat there as the light faded, two souls who had lost something, but found understanding in the quiet. For once, I didn't feel alone. Sometimes, healing begins when someone reminds you that your storm isn't the only one. The lesson in stillness. The next day, I found myself walking back to that same bench, half hoping the old man would be there again, half afraid he wouldn't. And there he was, sitting with the same calm posture, as if the night hadn't touched him at all. That he greeted me with that knowing smile. You came back, he said. I guess I did, I answered. Maybe I wanted to hear more about walking beside the wind. He laughed, a quiet, raspy sound that carried more warmth than words ever could. Then he said, you know, the Danes have a saying, ro I sindet. It means peace in the mind. But it doesn't mean quietness around you. It means quietness within you, even when everything else is loud. He looked at the lake as he spoke, his eyes following the ripples made by a drifting swan. Most people, he continued, try to silence the noise outside. They run away from their pain, distract themselves, talk too much. But peace isn't found in escaping the storm. It's found in learning to listen to it, until it stops screaming. I let that sink in. Maybe that's why silence feels uncomfortable, because it forces us to hear our own hearts again. That he picked up a small rock and tossed it gently into the lake. You see how the ripples move? He asked. They fade because the water accepts them. The lake doesn't fight the stone. That's how you must be with pain. For a while, we both just watched the ripples fade. The moment stretched, soft, infinite. The wind brushed against my hair. The sound of distant church bells floated through the park. That he turned to me and said quietly, healing isn't an act. It's a pause. A long, gentle pause, where you finally let yourself exist without trying so hard to be okay. And just like that, something in me loosened, not healed, not fixed, just softened. I finally understood what he meant by roi sindet. Maybe peace isn't something you chase. Maybe it's something that finds you, when you finally stop running. The walk by the lake. That evening, I decided to walk along the lake alone. The sky was still heavy with the memory of rain, but the clouds had opened just enough to let the sun breathe through. The water shimmered, silver, trembling, alive. That I thought of what the old man had said, healing isn't an act. It's a pause. So I walked slower than usual, letting each step be its own quiet moment. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, birds called from the trees, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't rushing anywhere. The air felt thick with freshness, like the world had just been washed. I could smell grass, damp wood, and coffee from a nearby kiosk. Everything ordinary suddenly felt sacred, as if life had been whispering all along, and I was only now learning to listen. That I stopped near the bridge, watching ripples spread from a swan gliding gracefully through the water. It made me think about how language works, the way a single word can travel across time, touch another's soul, and slowly fade, leaving traces behind. Maybe peace is like that too, not permanent, but always returning in small, soft waves. As I stood there, a group of teenagers passed by, laughing in Danish, their voices echoing across the lake. I didn't understand every word, but I understood the feeling, the lightness, the joy of being alive. And I realized something simple but powerful. You don't need to understand everything to feel connected. I whispered the words, "Roi Sindet," under my breath. Peace in the mind. It sounded different now, not like an idea, but like a practice. Every inhale, every sound, every step was part of it. The storm in my chest had quieted. Not gone, just quieter. And maybe that's enough. Maybe peace isn't about silence. It's about learning to walk beside your own noise, gently, patiently, like walking beside the lake after the rain. The return home. When I got back to my apartment, the light outside had softened into gold. Copenhagen has this quiet magic in the evenings, as if the whole city exhales at once. I hung my jacket by the door, kicked off my wet shoes, and stood still for a while, listening to the soft hum of my radiator. Everything was the same table, the same cup, the same quiet walls. But somehow, it all felt lighter. Maybe it wasn't the world that had changed. Maybe it was me. I made tea this time, not coffee, and sat down with a small notebook. The pages were still blank, but for once, that didn't feel intimidating. I began to write. It's not that peace disappears after pain. It's that we stop hearing it. I paused, watching my handwriting. The words didn't look perfect, but they felt honest. I wrote again, "Silence isn't empty. It's full of the things we haven't listened to yet." The more I wrote, the more I realized how much noise had been living inside me. Guilt, regret, fear, all talking at once. But beneath it all, there was something still, something kind. It had been waiting patiently, like the old man at the bench. I thought about him again, his slow smile, the way he tossed crumbs to pigeons without rushing. Maybe that's what peace really looks like, not dramatic forgiveness or instant joy, but small, consistent gentleness. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that just stays. Outside, the street lamps flickered on. The city hummed softly, bicycles rolling, laughter echoing from a distance, the soft tap of rain returning. I closed my notebook and whispered, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure to whom, the man, the storm, or myself. I realized that sometimes, the hardest part of healing isn't moving on. It's allowing yourself to stop running and simply be home again, and for the first time in a long while, I was. The new morning. The next morning came quietly. No thunder, no rain, just the soft gray light that Denmark wears so well. I woke before my alarm, and for a moment, I just lay there, listening. The city was still half asleep, but life was returning. The distant hum of bicycles, the soft clink of cups from a cafe downstairs, the world beginning again. That I got up and opened the curtains. The sky was pale, washed clean. The same view as every day, but it didn't feel the same. I realized something simple. Peace doesn't always arrive with a grand entrance. Sometimes, it slips in softly, unnoticed, like morning light touching the corner of a window. That I made my coffee slowly, the way I always did. But this time, I didn't rush the steps. I listened to the bubbling water, watched the steam rise, breathed it in like a prayer. Every motion felt like a conversation between me and life, gentle, forgiving. Knew that I sat by the window, sipping quietly, watching raindrops slide off the rooftops. There was no pain this time, only calm. The old man's words echoed in my mind, peace in the mind. Not outside, but inside. And I understood now, peace wasn't something I had to earn, chase, or fix. It was always there, beneath the noise, waiting for me to stop long enough to notice. As I looked out at Copenhagen, the streets gleaming, the air clean after the storm, I smiled. The storm had changed me, yes. But maybe that's what storms are for. To wash away the dust, to teach you how to see the world again. That I took another sip and whispered softly, thank you, for staying. Because peace had never left. I had only forgotten how to listen. That morning, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I just felt alive. But here's the strange thing about peace. It never stays still for long. Just when you think you've found it, life whispers, let's see if you've really learned. That night, as the wind began to stir again outside my window, I wondered, what if another storm was already on its way? Would I still remember how to breathe, how to listen, how to stay calm inside the noise? Because peace isn't a destination. It's a conversation, one that life keeps testing, over and over, and maybe, the next morning would bring another lesson. In the next story, we'll find out what happens when calm hearts are tested once more, and how even peace can break, beautifully.